The unanswered mysteries surrounding ancient civilizations have been a source of inspiration for many conspiracy theorists. In fact, some of these mysteries are so interesting that many of us either already believe them or would like to. One thing is for sure though, none of those thousands of conspiracy theories have ever been, classified. Or have they? We're all aware that the CIA has done some questionable things throughout history for the sake of national security, but you wouldn't expect a book to be both a national and international threat. The CIA recently declassified parts of a book that talks about lost ancient civilizations and the catastrophic events that made them vanish thousands of years ago. This mysterious book was written in 1963 by a guy named Chan Thomas, and it was going to be published by Emerson House in 1965 until the CIA got involved. For some mysterious reason, they classified the book, and it was never released to the public until recently. But here's where it gets interesting. The book was declassified in 2013 due to the Freedom of Information Act, but it wasn't released to the public until 2016. And what was released truly raises a few questions. The original version of this document was 284 pages long, but the PDF essay that was released was heavily censored, with just 57 pages, which makes it 1/5 of the whole document. The pages were edited before they were released to the public in such a way that you wouldn't even notice that the other pages were missing. Now, no one really knows why this book was classified in the first place, but it has some interesting content from what I've gathered. The author of the book had quite the imagination and a huge love for ancient civilizations. And even though what he had to say is very thought-provoking, some of it is just bizarre. He believes that our planet is locked into a never-ending cycle of pole shifts and Earth crust displacements that are responsible for the mass extinctions of many civilizations which existed more than 6,000 years ago, even before the Sumerians. He believed that these events caused more damage to the Earth than meteors, and he bases this theory on a few artifacts that exist around the world, but weren't really noticed until recently. But I'll get into that in a bit. Those mass extinctions that the book talks about include the end of the Ice Age, when huge 2-mile-thick ice sheets disappeared from northern Europe, Northern America, and Canada, and caused 100 species to go extinct. And here's how the author illustrates his hypothesis. He believes that there was a geomagnetic pole shift which caused catastrophic changes to both the atmosphere and the Earth's crust, resulting in the extinction of many civilizations over time. Now, even though the geomagnetic pole shift is a real thing, it doesn't just happen overnight. It happens really slowly, only about every few 100,000 years, according to scientists. But it's a bit more complicated than it sounds. It is a well-known fact that the North Pole is somewhere above Alaska, and the South Pole is close to the middle of Antarctica. Now, these are the geographic poles, and they'll always be north and south. However, the Earth's magnetic poles flipped a few 100,000 years ago. So if you had a compass, let's say 700,000 years ago, it would instead point south and show you the Antarctic. But the author of the book has a different theory. He believed that the flip of the north and south magnetic poles doesn't happen every few 100,000 years, but every 12,000 years, and that this flip occurs in just a few hours, causing a catastrophic apocalypse. He thinks this happens as a result of an explosion inside the Earth's core. This explosion causes the magnetic poles to flip, but it also causes the Earth's crust to move. According to the book, due to these catastrophic events, a lot of the Earth's continents that were submerged underwater rose above sea level in just a few hours. Now, here's where it gets interesting. The author also states that the Peruvian Andes were beneath the ocean before the last pole shift. And even though it seems far-fetched, since the Andes are approximately 22,000 feet above sea level, there was evidence to support that claim in the late 80s. Scientists found whale bones and fossils that are said to be millions of years old on top of the Andes and the Himalayan mountains. It's also suggested in the book that the deep freeze the Earth went through during the Younger Dryas event caused the Gulf Stream to be disrupted. and he points to some interesting evidence to support that theory. Frozen mammoths were found trapped in blocks of ice with food still in their mouths. Now, this is a true mystery, because freezing cold weather is in their nature, and they were among the few animals that could truly survive in the Ice Age. So, what could have caused them to freeze so quickly? Kinda makes you go, doesn't it? The document describes the Great Pyramid of Giza as a true enigma as well. The Pyramid of Giza is made out of 2.5 million stone blocks that are placed on top of each other with great precision. It's close to 750 feet wide and more than 450 feet high. To this day, we're still not able to explain how it was constructed, and it's quite difficult to understand the internal design as well. On the inside, the pyramid has no similarities to the other pyramids, and, despite popular belief, there were no mummies found in any of them. If you think that's a bit weird, wait for the next one. There are absolutely no hieroglyphs found in any of the pyramids, and that goes both ways. What do I mean? There are also no pyramids, or anything that resembles a pyramid, in any hieroglyphs either. Mr. Thomas believes that the pyramids were created hundreds of thousands of years before the Egyptians by a civilization that went extinct. Speaking of civilizations, in his book he even mentions the Greeks. He claims that in Greece, there was another ancient race of people that went extinct as well. He claims they were extremely tall with blue eyes and blonde hair, and had access to advanced technology that the Greeks couldn't have known about in their prime. Now, before we drift too far away from the stone blocks, let's talk about another mystery, the temple in Baalbek, Lebanon, and its ginormous foundation blocks. Those stones, which make up the Heliopolis, were also used for the temple in Rome. The foundations of the temples are made of 900-ton trilithon stones, and according to the author, this is proof that there must have been a lost ancient civilization with advanced technology. Now, most archaeologists claim that those stones were made by the Romans. However, there's no evidence to support that. The Romans didn't have the technological equipment to make the stones or lift them. So, you might think, what if they just made them in that place right then and there? Well, those stones were also lifted 30 feet high and were placed next to each other with mathematical precision. And let's not forget about the blocks on top of the Heliopolis in Lebanon, which weigh about 800 tons each. But wait till you hear the next one. The Romans don't even credit themselves for these stones. They claim that they built up the sides, but they don't take credit for the extraordinarily large and heavy foundation stones. The author also makes an interesting point about the distance between the Roman capital and Baalbek in Lebanon. Why would the Romans build the world's largest monolithic stones in such a remote area, and so far away from their capital, and never take credit for it? Well, folks, it's a mystery to me. Now, let's move on to the most intriguing enigma, Easter Island, which is located in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, or nowhere, if you will. The author questions how people found it or even settled in such a remote island that long ago. One of the signifiers of Easter Island are the Moai statues, and the mystery surrounding who they depict and why. What's an even bigger question is how they were created, moved, and positioned in the places they were found. According to this declassified document, Easter Island was part of the now lost continent named Mu, and it was sunk in the Pacific Ocean in a disastrous cataclysm that happened during one of those pole shifts. The continent of Mu, according to the book, was as big as South America, and what we now call Easter Island is just what's left of that continent. The author also believes that this is what happened with the lost city of Atlantis as well. Plato is even quoted about this, saying that the whole city of Atlantis sunk miles beneath the waves within just a day. Even though the whole story sounds very intriguing and makes some interesting points, we know that, scientifically speaking, a cataclysmic pole shift causing entire civilizations to go extinct isn't possible.
On October 30th, 1759, the inhabitants of the Middle East were jolted awake by an earthquake. Cracks appeared in the walls of their homes, roofs began to crumble. People ran out of their homes and gathered in open areas. But because of strong shocks, they kept losing their footing and falling. A month later, there was another earthquake, but it turned out to be even stronger. Trees broke, houses collapsed, deep cracks appeared in the ground. The disaster lasted for 2 minutes. Oases, roads, and cities were destroyed. Incredibly, Baalbek's ancient buildings withstood earthquakes. Some historians state that this majestic and mysterious place was built during the Roman Empire, but many researchers disagree. Whatever the truth is, the city is one of the main archaeological phenomena of humankind. The most amazing building of Baalbek is the Temple of Jupiter. The inhabitants of the Roman Empire believed that Jupiter held power over lightning and thunder. The building looked like a platform with 54 columns. A massive roof rested on these columns. Today, you can only see 6 70-foot-high columns. Each of them consists of 3 sections and resembles a pencil. The cores of these pencils were made of lead. This made the columns exceptionally strong. Each of these pieces of stone weighed an incredible 80 tons. That's the weight of 35 Ford Explorer SUVs. Look, this is the largest block in the Great Pyramid of Giza. But compared to the blocks from Baalbek, it doesn't even look that impressive. The foundation under the Temple of Jupiter was preserved. That's how specialists figured out it consisted of about 25 monolithic stones, weighing 450 tons each. It means that the blocks from Baalbek weigh almost 4 times more than the blocks from Egypt. There are 3 more enormous limestone blocks in the foundation. They weigh 800 tons each. This is more than twice the weight of a Boeing 747 plane. Ancient builders must have had a hard time carving such giants from a piece of stone. And after that, they also had to pull them to the construction site and lift them to a significant height. Repeating these logistics would probably turn out to be a nightmare for present-day builders. To do this amount of work, they would need modern equipment. But Baalbek's constructors didn't have trucks, cranes with circular saws, or electricity. How did the builders of the past manage to do this? Scientists have a theory that includes ropes, winches, and lever systems. Naturally, the engineers of the past made all the gadgets from wood. Around 3,000 feet away from the ruins of the temple complex, there's a quarry. Archaeologists suppose that's where the stones for the construction were cut. They found a block of limestone there. It seemed to be too large even for this incredible place. The monolith got called the Stone of the South. It was 65 feet long and 13 feet wide. The ancient builders didn't have time to completely separate it from its mother rock. A group of scientists from Austria estimated that this piece of limestone weighed more than 1,000 tons. That's like 3 Boeing aircraft or 160 African elephants. There was another surprise awaiting the archaeologists near the Stone of the South. It was the second monolith that weighed more than 1,200 tons. But the ancient builders didn't stop at that. They continued to work. In 2014, in the same quarry, German archaeologists unearthed a block that weighed 1,650 tons. No one has figured out yet why people of the past needed a piece of stone that weighed as much as 125 school buses. It's also unclear how they were going to move this giant and why they didn't finish the job. In any case, this third monolith is the largest processed piece of stone in human history. There are more questions than answers. Some researchers believe that people of the past had high-tech equipment. Others don't think so, but are eager to understand how the builders managed to move those stones. There's a huge number of ancient buildings and artifacts on the planet. Lots of them make researchers scratch their heads. Near the Pyramid of Djoser in Egypt, archaeologists have found a network of tunnels. This place is called Serapeum. It contains 24 sarcophagi weighing from 70 to 100 tons. The giant boxes are carved from a single piece of granite and covered with heavy lids. The sarcophagi are perfectly symmetrical. To the touch, their walls are as smooth as glass. Even with the current level of technology, this is very difficult to do. But the ancient Egyptians managed this feat. The Lycurgus cup is a priceless artifact and example of ancient nanotechnology. It's made of glass that can change its color. If you put a source of light in front of the cup, it turns green. If the light is behind the goblet, it becomes deep red. In this case, the figure of Greek king Lycurgus turns pale purple. Scientists understood how this color change worked only at the end of the 20th century. Through microscopes, they saw nanoparticles of silver, gold, and copper. They had been added to the glass matrix. Thanks to this, you can observe a color change called dichroism. Interestingly, the gold and silver were grounded into a fine dust. It's almost impossible to do this by accident. Most likely, the ancient experts knew for sure what they were doing. Bolivia has a curious place called Puma Punku. It looks as if an ancient giant played there with an enormous construction set. And after the game, they forgot to put the pieces back into the box. But there are no giants, and the huge stone blocks were carved by ancient builders over 1,500 years ago. Some of the rocks weigh 100 tons. The blocks were brought to an altitude of almost 13,000 feet above sea level from the quarry 60 miles away from the construction site. There's no forest in that area. This means the builders couldn't use trees to make wooden rollers. The monument belongs to the Inca civilization. Scientists are sure they didn't know anything about wheels. In 1992, the inhabitants of a Chinese village decided to drain a pond. Their ancestors had been using it to wash clothes and catch fish for hundreds of years. They kept pumping the water out for 17 days. At the bottom of the reservoir, they made an unexpected discovery. The villagers saw an entrance to a cave going down to a depth of 100 feet. The incredible find was named the Longyu Caves. Unknown builders carved out 320,000 square feet of galleries. There are separate rooms, bridges, pools, and columns that support the ceiling. The walls of the cave are covered with strange carved lines and patterns. Scientists haven't found any information about who built the caves and why they did it. The construction technology also remains a mystery. Antonio Stradivari lived in Italy in the 18th century. He created musical instruments. More than 600 of his works have survived to this day. 500 of them are violins. One of the instruments was sold at auction for $16 million. The violins made by this master sound clear and deep. Researchers can't understand why Stradivarius instruments produce such unique sounds. Perhaps it's all about the varnish the master used to cover the violins. The answer may also lie in the wood the instruments are made of. In those days, Europe had a cold climate. Because of this, the wood became denser, and the instruments made of it sounded especially pleasing to the ear. In the Indian city of Delhi, there's a 23-foot-high pole. It weighs 6.5 tons and is made of 98% wrought iron. The 1,600-year-old pillar has no signs of rust or decay. Scientists believe that the monument is so well preserved thanks to the dry weather and the chemical composition of the metal. It might be resistant to corrosion. And still, researchers don't know how the blacksmiths managed to make an iron pillar that's not afraid of rust. It seems like a tough feat, even for modern metallurgists. The Al-Nasla rock is divided into two parts by a perfectly straight slit. Each boulder stands on a small pedestal. Some people believe this is the evidence of ancient laser technology. But geologists think the split happened due to the ground shifting or natural vibrations that occurred under the rock. This process led to the appearance of the crack. It had been deepening for thousands of years, and gradually, the natural monument took the form you can see today. Imagine you get to be an archaeologist for the day. You'll travel the world to solve the mystery of long-lost civilizations that disappeared without a trace. Grab your chisel and fedora, and let's go. You arrive at the American Southwest, where an ancient mystery is waiting to be solved. You make your way to Chaco Canyon, just outside of Albuquerque, New Mexico. It's hot and dry in this deserted area. You're here to visit the ancient ruins of the Anasazi people. It's said that they were a thriving civilization that met a mysterious end. You hike a few miles before you begin to make out the shape of dwellings, constructions built of stone in the middle of the canyon. This is Pueblo Bonito, a 10th century complex that contains as many as 800 rooms and stands over 5 stories tall. The buildings are beautiful and made from sandstone. To access the complex, its inhabitants built a 400-mile network of roads, some of them 30 feet wide. You can't wrap your head around the fact that it was built so long ago. Everything looks so well preserved. The Anasazi reigned over the so-called Four Corners region from 100 CE to around 1600 CE. During this time, they built a civilization that sprawled over 30,000 square miles, including Colorado, New Mexico, Utah, and Arizona. Standing inside a huge kiva, an underground ceremonial chamber, you wonder what happened to the Anasazi people. Scientists have analyzed tree rings and found out that the Anasazi population lived through a period of great drought. The drought is believed to have lasted 23 years, and there was possibly no rain at all during this time. This definitely affected their livelihood, from malnutrition to battles over food and resources. But was it enough to make 30,000 people flee their homes? Researchers say these people left their homes with their belongings still in place. Ladles were left in ceramic bowls. Granaries were full of supplies. It was as if they intended to return, but never had the chance to come back. For many years, archaeologists have believed that the drought was the reason for the disappearance of this thriving society. But there's other evidence that shows a different story. Anthropologists say that the ancestral Puebloans, as they are also called, were an exemplary population. They were peaceful and lived together in harmony. But that's not what their architecture shows. They isolated themselves from the rest of the world by building their settlements so high on top of cliffs. And they built walls and other security structures in order to protect themselves. What were they so afraid of? Recently, archaeologists began to study bone fossils of the ancestral Puebloans, and they found evidence that suggests that toward the end of their civilization, things might have gotten pretty bad. Evidence shows that local leaders were ruling using fear-based methods. Severe punishment started to be inflicted on those who did not follow their strict rules. Why this happened is still a mystery, and you might need many other excavation trips to find out the truth. It's lucky that your next destination is really close by. Still in New Mexico, you'll visit the Blackwater Draw. It's a national prehistoric site that holds the story of the Clovis people. You're shocked to find out that the Clovis are possibly the oldest humans to have inhabited the U.S. They were the first humans to allegedly cross the Bering Strait and follow the ice-free trails down to the U.S.'s southern plains. Try to picture what this area looked like when the Clovis people roamed this land. A huge spring-fed lake with mammoths, giant sloths, saber-toothed tigers, and bison much bigger than the ones we have today wandering around. The archaeological site you're visiting shows that the Clovis population were big game hunters. You're able to identify the bones of several mammoths and even the stone tools that our prehistoric ancestors used to hunt them. Some of these date back to 13,000 years ago, aka the end of the last ice age. You're presented with two possible theories on the disappearance of the Clovis population. It's possible that during the final 1,500 years of the last ice age, changes in climate caused a shortage of food. Scientists also believe that this situation was worsened by overhunting. Another theory suggests that a large meteor hit North America, and this was enough to alter the climate and make the Clovis people migrate southward to try to survive. But the truth is, there's no evidence that any of that happened. Next, you'll fly to the Pacific Ocean, to the mysterious Easter Island. This place has left us with many questions, from the building of 13-foot-high face statues to the sudden disappearance of the Rapa Nui people who inhabited the area. You approach the island at Anakina, a white sandy beach on the island's northern shore. Researchers believe this area was one of the first settlements of the Rapa Nui. You could say you're standing at the end of the world, as you're over 3,000 miles away from South America and 1,000 miles away from the nearest island. Around 800 CE, when the first humans arrived, the island was an oasis. Today, the area is mostly deserted. You get your first clue on the fall of the Rapa Nui from an excavation pit you open at the beach. There's clear evidence of human presence: charcoal, tools, and bones, some of them belonging to rats. Bingo! When humans arrived at Easter Island, they brought along rodent companions. They probably didn't know this at the time, but these rodents would contribute largely to their demise. Rats love palm trees, which helped to deforest the natural vegetation of the island gradually over the years. But there's another clue. Looking into genetic data, you discover that South Americans came into contact with the Rapa Nui around 1722. What might have happened to this population is the same that happened to other more isolated groups. The contact with foreign groups brought about diseases that possibly led to the end of the Rapa Nui. To finish off your trip, you're headed to Cambodia. The country was once home to the Great Khmer Empire from the 9th century CE to the 15th century CE. The ruins of this place are magnificent. Your main excavation site is the Plains of Angkor, built alongside the Mekong River. This huge site was the most important Khmer city at the time. Just FYI, Angkor actually means capital city in the Khmer language. The Khmer were able to build a huge network of roads connecting Angkor with the rest of the empire. And it's believed that up to 1 million people were spread throughout the Khmer Empire at its peak days. It was the largest pre-industrial city in the entire world. It's comparable in size to modern-day Los Angeles, just so you can get an idea. The Khmers were also master builders and engineers. They managed to build a complex irrigation system that helped their rice farming through the centuries. And to connect their cities, they built almost 500 miles of intricate highways and bridges. Oh, and not to mention the complex architecture of their religious buildings, such as Angkor Wat, one of today's most visited tourist sites in Cambodia. It took over 30 years to build, and it spreads over almost 500 acres. Back in the day, its towers were probably decorated with gold. But today, the site is a maze of vine-covered temples. Like your fellow researchers that came here before you, you're unsure of what caused this civilization to be wiped off the map. One possible guess has to do with the climate in the region. Strong monsoons might have caused massive floods and severe damage to the infrastructure, especially to the water system the Khmer people heavily relied on to survive. But another reason could have been regional conflict and immigration. Toward the end of the 15th century, the empire started to decline in numbers, and this could have weakened its strong power. You might not go home with many answers, but you've certainly learned a lot, huh?
It's the first day of your long-awaited trip to the Amazon forest. You flew all the way to South America. More specifically, you landed in the city of Manaus. It's the heart of the Brazilian Amazon. So far, you've traveled by air, car, and now water. You are on a tiny boat, moving through the dark waters of the Amazon River. Yes, the river is also called the Amazon. And just FYI, it's the second longest river in the world. It loses only to the Nile River in Egypt. The Amazon sprawls for an impressive 2,700 square miles, beginning in Peru and ending only when it meets the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Brazil. To get a closer look at the forest, you decide to start by exploring it by boat. First up, you watch some piranha fishing. You can even try to catch one yourself if you like. As you may know, piranhas are carnivorous fish that inhabit the Amazon River, so it might not be your best option to go swimming in these waters. One of the most emblematic species of alligators present in the Amazon River basin is the broad-snouted caiman. It looks pretty much like a regular alligator, except for the fact that it has a yellow chin. Your guide leaves the boat and searches the water to show you a caiman up close. He also tells you of another legendary creature that lives in the dark waters of the river, the pink dolphin. Lucky you get to witness a family of pink dolphins showing their fins near your boat. They look magical from the place where you're sitting. You've probably never known dolphins can be pink, huh? After a few mesmerizing moments, you discover that the dolphin's pink color is nothing but an illusion. The animals are originally pinkish-gray, but due to the brown colors of the Amazon River, they look vivid pink when you stare at them from above. Your guide tells you that the pink dolphin is a central character of Brazilian folklore. Locals believe that the pink dolphins can turn into humans and wander off into towns at night. You get off your boat near one of the entrances to the forest. Now you're going to continue your trip on foot. Your guide says that you are venturing into very dangerous terrain. The Amazon is home to some of the creepiest species of wildlife on the globe. But don't worry, we'll get to see a lot of them today. You've come prepared, of course. Bug spray, a raincoat, and your sharp eyes. Inside the jungle, you need to be alert at all times. You may have heard legends of the anaconda, a snake that can swallow animals as big as a cow in one go. Sorry to break it to you, but those are not just legends. Reptiles like these do actually exist. They live deep in the jungle. Is it right there, moving between the trees? Is it a spider? The so-called Goliath bird-eater is a monster spider. Its legs can grow up to a foot in length, and the spider itself can weigh around 6 ounces. It's also known as the king of tarantulas. You shouldn't get too close, of course. It's not venomous to humans, but its bite can surely sting. As its name suggests, the Goliath bird-eater can even eat birds, as long as they are smaller than it is. Up next, you run into another species of spider that draws your attention. This one is so tiny that you almost don't see it. It's known by the popular name of the decoy spider. You see one of its creations, a gigantic spider built by the tiny Cyclosa spider in order to scare off large predators. This is as amazing as it is creepy. A spider that uses the remains of other insects and dry leaves to create the image of a large spider on its web. If it fools predators, perfect! But to us humans, this work of art looks almost endearing. Who knew there were artists in the arachnid world? Near a small lake, you witness a unique scene. A large snake is slowly slithering its way toward a lizard that is resting on a rock. The lizard seems obvious to the presence of the dangerous reptile, but right as the snake is preparing to attack, the lizard flies the scene in its iconic way. The so-called basilisk lizard is famous for its ability to walk on water, or rather run across the water. This isn't an illusion, just a matter of balancing. The small lizard moves its legs on top of the water very fast, while its long tail serves as a counterweight. I wish I could do that. If you've ever wondered what a frog looks like on the inside, you've come to the right place. Right in front of your eyes, there is a rare local species of frog. It's known as the glass frog. This species of amphibian has a type of transparent skin that is completely see-through. In other words, you can see the frog's interior with astounding clarity. It's as if you had X-ray vision. Moving on with your journey, soon you come across a pond. Floating on its water is probably the biggest water lily you've ever seen in your life. These huge plants are also known as the Victoria Amazonica. They can measure up to 8 feet across and hold the weight of a grown-up person. But I wouldn't recommend trying to climb on it if I were you. Just cause, you know, it's the Amazon forest we're talking about. The wildlife here is amazing, but the forest itself is also a sight. There are over 80,000 species of plants and trees grown in the Amazon rainforest. In fact, you can find 10% of all the world's wildlife in this jungle. An estimated 400 billion trees grow on the gigantic area the forest occupies. Of course, this place is bound to be biodiverse, right? You won't be able to witness this phenomenon during your trip, but your guide tells you about a unique species of tree that is famous for being able to walk. Yep, you've heard correctly. There are walking trees in the Amazon rainforest. They don't have legs or anything like that, but they do move around in search of better lighting conditions. The Amazon canopy is so thick that only 1% of sunlight can reach the forest floor. Because of this, some trees end up getting less sunlight than others. The so-called walking palm trees seem to be adapted to this situation. They grow new roots, which helps them move for 1 to 2 inches per day. They can walk up to 65 feet per year. Maybe that's what inspired John Ronald Reuel Tolkien to create ants, huh? Those are pretty similar tree beings that roam freely around the world. I kid you not, it's not only wildlife that inhabits the Amazon. Actually, over 30 million people live in the forest. And there are also ancient settlements that scientists believe to have been thriving there. And I'm not talking about El Dorado, that's just a myth. But in 2018, a groundbreaking study showed that up to 1 million people probably inhabited the Amazon, between 1250 and 1500 CE. Can you imagine that? Working alongside local indigenous people, researchers from the University of Florida found several mounds in the Amazon. Besides these mounds, they also discovered interesting ditches and geoglyphs. After mapping all of these recurring mounds, scientists understood that this was a sign of an ancient settlement. They found remnants of carefully designed walls centered around plazas. This could only mean that these ancient cities were big and could host hundreds of thousands of people. These findings brought back the idea that the Amazon could have been home to thriving civilizations way before the Europeans arrived there. But rather than cities drenched in gold, they were simply well-developed agricultural societies.
So how alone are we in our galaxy? Crickets. Yep, we're mostly alone out here. But are there other civilizations lurking somewhere out there in the depths of the Milky Way? Could they possibly have evil intentions and be a threat to us? Hey, like we need more threats. Well, hey, let's have some fun with this. Some theorists reviewed humans' history and past actions toward one another. No miscongeniality awards there. And assuming they were somehow like us, used this to calculate the probability of space invaders. They determined that there could be 4 evil civilizations in our galaxy. The 4 could be eager for intergalactic domination, or maybe just for a good game of dominoes. They could be highly advanced in technology, or they've only just invented an evil version of game consoles. To understand how advanced these cultures could be and what to expect, there is a way to define their threat levels. A method called the Kardashev scale analyzes intergalactic nations' possible abilities. With 3 different levels, it reviews the amount of energy a civilization could take from their star, indicating their tech level. This only includes those that have reached interstellar communication. So any other beings out there using, let's say, space pigeons will of course be excluded. Type 1 shows that they can harness the energy from the sun, but only from what is received within their own planet, like solar power panels. Type 2 is where they can use the energy directly from the sun, like through a Dyson sphere. It's used to harness all of the sun's energy, having been built entirely around it. And lastly, Type 3, where civilization can use all elements provided by the galaxy, with the power to not only harness the energy from stars, but also black holes, even the central supermassive one. These levels are important to assess how advanced civilizations could be out there. The Milky Way is estimated to be around 13.6 billion years old. Modern humans have only been around for the last 200,000 years, and we're only a Type 1. It's scary to imagine the time other beings have had to develop. We're considered a bit of a late bloomer in comparison. Earth is, shall we say, late to the party because we're located on the outer arms of the galaxy. Mathematicians posit that more centralized star systems have had more time to progress. Now, with that in mind, how common would other intelligent beings be in the galaxy? With all the life-ending events Earth has survived, it's a miracle to have a planet like ours, and that we would be unique. Or are we? Well, there are 100 trillion stars in our galaxy, and there are up to 200 billion planets, with an estimated 300,000 exoplanets capable of sustaining the kind of life we know about. From those habitable planets, how could we tell which ones have other beings eager to send us an email? No one's had the time to individually count, of course. The Drake equation can give us some rough numbers if we take averages of a few key factors. It breaks down the criteria of how many planets with life are intelligent enough to make communication. The numbers are huge, considering how many stars might have planets. And from there, we distill it down further to those within the habitable zone in the solar system. This zone is called the Goldilocks zone, as it's not too far from the Sun and not too close to it. It's just right. We reduce the numbers even further by calculating which of those habitable planets will then be able to support life. And from those random places, the equation takes the probability of how many intelligent beings will be and if they are intelligent enough to communicate. The criteria is complicated, and so it's not an easy equation to explain. But from its estimate, there could be up to 100 million planets with intelligent civilizations. But just like with Earth's history or struggles, these civilizations may also have their own challenges. World-ending events should be thrown into the equation, like asteroids, solar flares, supervolcanoes, and supernova. They could also destroy themselves through technology, like AI dominance or nanotech, or by affecting their own ecosystems and running out of resources, or by just acting stupidly. If we take these into the equation, the remaining living civilizations could be around 15,000. But what could they possibly want from humans? We do have an abundance of rare earth materials that could be of value, ready to be harvested and easily collected. Besides an appealing vast amount of water they could suck dry, hydrogen is a required element of rocket fuels. Though these things aren't exactly rare in the galaxy and could be harvested easier from other closer solar systems or asteroids. Our technology might be intriguing to them. Our range of innovations on Earth, invented while being isolated in separate countries, help provide different technology paths around the world. Other civilizations could have followed a completely different route and didn't learn the importance of many things we have here on Earth, like karaoke. The same goes for applied sciences, where they may have evolved in different atmospheres with different elements. Their science would be mainly affected by that, and ours would provide them with more knowledge. Then there's one of the rarest things in the galaxy, that Earth can support life. This would be very useful for an intergalactic traveler, rather than going through the long process of terraforming an unlivable planet. Why not just take it? With a cozy outpost, it would be a lovely little holiday destination when they need some time off from conquering other civilizations. Fortunately, they wouldn't be interested in eating us, or probably wouldn't have an appetite for anything on Earth. They would need to have similar biochemistry and require the same enzymes to process the molecules we're built from. Whew! But the most likely thing they would want is to remove any competition. The biggest threat to them is anything that would provide a challenge to their domination. But before you get too frightened by these evil civilizations, this was based on human behavior. It's possible that any beings out there could lack or avoid many of our human emotions. For instance, their capacity for anger might be limited, or they could have evolved without it. They could come from a world with a history so different from ours that they could be overly trusting, making us the bad guys. But again, they may also lack empathy and other positive traits we have. Well, let's hope they only have our nice traits. Luckily, there's a big thing that separates us from everything else. The galaxy is huge, and it takes a very long time to go anywhere, even to our closest solar systems. The fastest thing we've sent into space is the Galileo probe, which travels up to 100,000 miles per hour. Even so, it would take 72,000 years to reach the closest star system, Alpha Centauri. Still, with a newly proposed laser-guided probe that could travel at 1/5 the speed of light, it would yet take up to 20 years to make that journey. On a larger scale, the Milky Way is over 105,700 light-years across. If a civilization was even capable of light speed, it would take them hundreds of thousands of years to travel from one end to the other. With a huge distance between the small number of civilizations, the only successful contact would be through advanced interstellar travel. But to achieve such a long journey, the greater the mass to be accelerated, the more energy is required, so it's not likely anything too large will be sent. But they could travel here very quickly in a small shuttle, using the ability to break cosmic speed laws. They may already be here, watching us closely, or just binge-watching Netflix. They would need very advanced technology, and the number of species obtaining this is theorized to be only 2 out of the 15,000. That means there's a 1/100% chance of evil civilizations capable of visiting us soon. If they do know we're here and they want something from us, it's likely to take them thousands, if not millions of years to arrive. So, we've got plenty of time to relax. Time for more Brightside.
Dozens of spacecraft and hundreds of probes take off from Earth and head for our planet's twin sister, Venus. It's about the same size as the Earth and has around 80% of our planet's mass. The temperatures here are too high for humans, and it doesn't have the air we're used to breathing. But we went there because scientists recently found traces of phosphine gas, which suggests that life might be there. Phosphine comes from various microbes and bacteria, so humanity goes on this journey to discover this life. With our technology, a flight to Venus would take 3.5 to 6.5 months, but we finally made it. Spaceships are landing on the planet, and when the first humans come to the surface, they see heat-scorched deserts, lava lakes, and geysers of poisonous acid. And that's it. Scientists miscalculated the radio telescope data. Phosphine never existed on Venus. So we're going back to the rockets, and we're getting ready for a longer trip across our galaxy. The scientists believe that there's at least 36 civilizations in the Milky Way that are similar to ours. They could be living organisms completely different from us. They may have different bodies, different eyes. They may walk and talk in a very different way than we do. But an advanced civilization has several criteria: technological progress and the use of developed communication between individuals. So, these civilizations must explore space, build cities, and be able to communicate with each other as independent species. Let's look at our galaxy and find these civilized worlds. So, the Milky Way is a spiral of 100,000 light years from side to side. If a star is born at one end of it in a super powerful blast, the light from that event won't even reach the other end until 100,000 years later. There's about 100 billion stars, and near each of them, there may be worlds similar to our solar system. Let's try to find these habitable worlds using giant sieves. First, we look for stars that have a lot of iron. Such stars burn at the perfect temperature for the development of life. And the iron in the star system will help form the cores of planets that will be home to another civilization. We sift the Milky Way through our sieve. We see that there are too many stars that fit the description, so we need another filter. Now let's find stars that look like the Sun in this pile. The star must be about 100 times larger than the Earth and 333,000 times heavier. An important criterion is the age of the star. When a star gets old, it begins to expand and turns into a red giant. At this time, it can absorb the planets around it. The life of such a star can end with a huge blast that destroys everything around it. So the star we're looking for must be relatively young. Let's use our sieve again. There's fewer stars, but still that's a lot. Now let's focus on the planets. They should be in the habitable zone of the star. Not too close to a star because then the temperature would be too high for life to be born. And not too far away. Then the planet would just be an ice block with nothing living on it. The temperature of the planet must allow the water to remain liquid. Another filter is the age of the candidate planet. It takes time for an advanced civilization to develop. Based on the experience of Earth, scientists believe that it takes at least 4.5 billion years for any life form to evolve to the human level. So we're looking for planets similar to Earth or older. We use our sieve one last time, and voila! We have 36 worlds where an advanced civilization is possible. Scientists conducted this study and published it in April 2020, based on these very criteria. All that's left is to discover these civilizations and make the first contact. We can detect such a civilization by using radio waves that come from it. Suppose there's a planet A with primitive living organisms on it. Millions of years of evolution, and they'll become a civilization with advanced technology. Radio waves will be the way they communicate. Then the whole planet will emit radio waves like a star emits light. And here on Earth, we'll be able to pick up this signal with antennas pointed into space. But there's a problem with the distance between the planets. For example, planet A is 1,000 light years away from the Earth. When planet A starts emitting radio waves, these signals won't reach us until 10 centuries later. We learned to emit and receive radio waves in 1895. And if the civilization on planet A emitted a radio signal at the same time, we won't be able to pick up that signal until 2895. It'll be the same on Planet A. We sent a message in the form of a radio signal into space in 1974. In this signal, we encoded our number system, human DNA, and information about our solar system. If there's an advanced civilization on Planet A, they'll be able to receive this signal only in 2974, and we'd have to wait another millennium to get a response from them. Another problem with radio waves is that they don't look like a constant glow on the planet, but like a flare. Radio waves are only used at a certain stage of civilization. At first, it's the primary method of communication, but then we begin to use cell phones, cable TV, and fiber optics. And as technology advances further, our radio wave light begins to fade out. So we only have about 100 years of active radio use by civilization to find it. One day we caught a strange radio signal of an unknown origin. Its characteristics suggested that the signal was created artificially, perhaps by an outer space civilization or a passing starship. Further searches for this signal given no results, and this gave rise to many theories and arguments as to what it really was. It could have been a signal from Earth that reflected off a satellite flying through the sky, or it could have been the traces of a comet a few light years away. But let's assume it was a civilization from outer space, one of those 36 that probably exist. Now we need to make contact with them. So we throw our luggage into a rocket and head out in the direction of our suspected planet. Our rockets can fly at 17,600 miles per hour. That means a rocket could cross the entire United States in just 8 minutes. But even if an advanced civilization lived near our closest star, Proxima Centauri, it would take us about 73,000 years to get there. Even at the speed of light, it would take 4.2 years. So we need to solve the problem of space travel. Our scientists plan to reach about a quarter of the speed of light with a laser. A powerful laser beam from Earth will push a microscopic probe in the right direction. This probe could reach our destination in about 17 years. And in another 4 years, when the signal from it reaches Earth, we'll know if there's an advanced civilization. Another possibility for faster-than-light travel is the warp bubble spacecraft. The spacecraft would have to compress space in front of it and stretch it behind its tail. Then we'll be able to reach any point in the universe in literally a few seconds. But such travel remains a fantasy for us. Perhaps we can get to different corners of the universe through wormholes. They're shortcuts similar to tunnels, but there's one problem. These wormholes might be inside black holes. They're the most mysterious objects in the universe. They're so heavy that even light can't escape their trap. Our spaceships wouldn't stand the tension either. There's also a theory that Earth is unique because it was born under completely accidental circumstances. 4.5 billion years ago, our planet was a block of lava that began to cool and solidify, but its tranquility was broken by an asteroid the size of an entire planet flying by. The collision occurred at such an angle that the Earth was not completely destroyed, but part of the asteroid remained in our orbit. A heavy rock near our planet stabilized Earth's rotation, and the gravitational interaction with the giant debris caused our core to heat up. In addition, the asteroid brought a lot of water to Earth. Such a collision is extremely unlikely. It's like winning the lottery, many times in a row. But so far, we have no reason to believe life in outer space exists. Just as we have no reason to believe that there's no advanced civilizations in the universe, except for ours.
Did you know that humans are real space people? You were born in space. Heck, even I was born in space. We were all born in space. But for humans to be here on Earth, so many conditions have to be precisely correct that it's highly improbable that we even exist. But we do. First, we, and any other space creatures who might be out there, have to live on a planet orbiting a yellowish white star, not a red star or a blue star. Not a blue star, because they burn out too quickly. In a few million years, there wouldn't be time for evolution to do its relatively slow magic and produce intelligent beings. Blue stars also tend to swell up and turn red. When they collapse and explode, it makes it highly unlikely that any civilization could prosper near a blue star. Red stars, which are by far the most numerous kind of stars, don't seem like good prospects for intelligent civilizations to orbit around either. Red stars are so cold and so dim that a planet that could grow a civilization must orbit very closely to the red star, which would expose the planet to intense, deadly X-ray radiation. So, though red stars are the most numerous and appear to have many planets orbiting them, red stars are a no-go for hosting intelligent, civilized life like our own. That leaves the yellowish stars, about 10% of all stars. However, an important fact must be met before considering the possibility of intelligent life living around a yellowish star. That fact is that the yellow star must be a third-generation star. Only third-generation stars will contain sufficient chemical diversity to sustain advanced life forms. Each time a star explodes, heavier, more complicated elements are created. The explosion expelled these elements and eventually found their way into a nebula. Gravity within the nebula will gradually form the next generation of stars, and so on. Our bodies need calcium for our skeletons and teeth. Our brains need zinc to help create the electrochemical signals that make us move, feel, and think. Our blood needs iron. Therefore, our bodies need to have formed around a third-generation star, and a yellow one. Amazingly, Earth has all the different elements in the universe, all 94 naturally occurring ones, from hydrogen to plutonium. Maybe that's why we're here. And we have to thank our third-generation yellow dwarf sun for that. Why yellow? Because yellow stars burn very steadily by nuclear fusion without significantly changing brightness over billions of years. If our sun became just 6% brighter or dimmer, Earth would become too hot or too cold to sustain civilized life. Fortunately, Earth is in the habitable zone around the sun. The habitable zone is where liquid water can exist on a planet. But that brings us to the second condition necessary for intelligent life to live in space: the planet itself. Recent studies with the Kepler telescope have shown that 1/4 of all yellow dwarf stars may contain Earth-like planets in the habitable zone around yellow dwarf stars. That figure is somewhat debatable. It might be as few as 1 out of every 33 yellow dwarf stars, but that's still a lot of planets orbiting yellow stars in habitable zones. So let's consider the second essential component for intelligent life in space: the planet itself. The planet that would bear intelligent civilization must have many particular characteristics that aren't easy to come by individually, and even more rare to find in combination. Most importantly, the planet must have protection against the star it's orbiting. Because stars shine by nuclear fusion in their cores, gas in the outer shell of the sun, called the corona, gets blown off into space in what's called the solar wind. Our United States satellites take constant readings of the force of the solar wind, which is mainly electrified, ionized, hydrogen nuclei, along with a smattering of atomic nuclei from the many other elements found in the sun. It's not the atmosphere that protects Earth, it's the magnetosphere that stops or deflects the dangerous solar wind, causing aurorae when the solar wind is attracted to Earth's magnetic poles and electrifies the air of the upper atmosphere like a fluorescent bulb. Without a magnetosphere surrounding it, any planet, even those in habitable zones, would be toasted by a constant rain of ionized hydrogen nuclei from its star. A planet with life on it must have a magnetosphere strong enough to deflect the solar wind. Not every planet in our solar system has a magnetosphere. The gas giant planets, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune, have magnetospheres, but gas planets cannot have civilizations. Of the solid worlds, only Earth and Mercury have magnetospheres, and Mercury is too weak to stop the solar wind because of its closeness to the sun. Another protective shield that keeps the Earth safe from the sun is its atmosphere. The atmosphere is about 300 miles thick, with most of it concentrated within just 10 miles of the Earth's surface. The atmosphere protects life on Earth from both the sun's ultraviolet, UV, radiation, and X-rays. The gas, ozone, which is 3 oxygen atoms bound into a large gas molecule in the upper atmosphere, blocks most of the sun's UV radiation from reaching the ground. The planet Mars, whose atmosphere is 1,000 times thinner than the Earth's, has no ozone, and the sun's ultraviolet emissions have totally irradiated its surface. A planet must be able to stop the UV radiation from its star, so the specific composition of the atmosphere is critical for any planet to have an intelligent civilization. We've got it, but it is a rare and precarious mix. The planet must have some part of its surface solid to walk and work on. The planet must have a crust. It's pure science fiction to consider underwater civilizations or floating civilizations in the atmospheres of other planets. A planet's crust must have tectonic plates that move. This movement of tectonic plates creates the subduction of the crust. Subduction is when one tectonic plate slides under or over another, bringing the fresh matter to the surface. This renewal of the chemical properties of the planet prevents chemical equilibrium, where nothing is reactive. Earthquakes and volcanoes also contribute to the process of geochemical renewal. That's right, earthquakes and volcanoes are good. Subduction of tectonic plates, then, is another planetary essential for life. Mars doesn't have tectonic plate activity. Neither does Venus nor Mercury. Mercury is one big tectonic plate, but there's no ongoing plate activity other than slight shrinkage. One big reason these planets have no life is that there's no geochemical reactivity because there's no tectonic subduction. And that brings us to the Moon. Yes, the Moon. To say that the Moon keeps us alive may seem like a stretch, but the contribution of the Moon to life on Earth is essential. First, the gravity of the Moon as it moves through space with the Earth not only makes the ocean tides ebb and flow, it also helps the rotation of the Earth to churn or stir the magma inside the Earth. The motion of the magma inside the Earth, with its high metallic content, contributes to the creation of the Earth's magnetosphere. So, the Moon keeps us safe in space by helping Earth become a geodynamo and creating our magnetism. The Moon is the largest moon in the solar system compared to the size of the planet it orbits. Essentially, it's primary. Many people consider the Earth-Moon system to be a double planet, but that's another issue. Another thing the Moon does that keeps life safe on Earth is to hold the Earth steady. Because the Moon is gravitationally locked to the Earth, the Moon acts much like a balance pole does for a tightrope walker. Therefore, the Earth doesn't wobble very much compared to other planets. This wobble is called libration. If the Earth wobbled as much as Mars or Saturn, not only would our weather become chaotic, but farming might have been impossible. These rare or unique astronomical circumstances work together to make Earth habitable for humanity. Many other factors are not astronomical, such as evolutionary, biological, and chemical factors required for life to exist on Earth. The probabilities, or improbabilities, are multiplying. Taken all together, we are very, very lucky to be here. In fact, we're so lucky that we may have hit the jackpot. Considering all the possibilities, it's doubtful that anywhere else in the universe is as fortunate as Earth.
Strange and amazing items are discovered often, but figuring out what our ancestors were up to is pretty tough. Especially when all you have are just some rusty cups and cave drawings. It's no surprise that even the experts in lab coats sometimes make mistakes. But it's not just about dusty plates and huge stones. Sometimes there's even humans with large heads. So grab your digging tools and let's travel back to ancient times to explore incredible societies that even scientists can't fully explain. Sardinia may look idyllic now, but I'm not gonna lie, I wouldn't fancy visiting it 3,000 years ago. Rumor has it, terrible giants roamed around this island back then. People even talk about finding human skeletons over 13 feet tall there, although nobody's ever shown anything to prove it. But the stories will make you wonder because some weird stuff has definitely happened. In 1974, over 5,000 pieces of broken stone artifacts were found in a part of the island called Monte Prama. But instead of being displayed in a museum, they were locked up in an underground vault for about 30 years. Sounds a bit suspicious, doesn't it? When they were finally displaced in 2005, scientists put the pieces together to find statues of 38 giant men standing 8 feet tall. Not quite as tall as the legendary skeletons, but still pretty huge. It's thought these statues were made by the Nuragic people, who lived on the island a long time ago. Besides giant statues, they also built over 8,000 massive stone buildings. Perhaps Nuragic weren't giants themselves, but they definitely liked their things big. I do too. I like a big number of likes on our videos. That would be pretty great. Thank you if you liked this and subscribed. Now back to the video. You and I are pretty smart, but we might not be the smartest humans ever. Actually, we might not even be the smartest species. Since 1913, some skull fossils found in South Africa have hinted at a possibly smarter contender called Boskop Man. This human-like species might have lived as recently as 10,000 years ago. Their skull suggests they had really big heads, which means their brains could have been 30% bigger than ours. Wow, Their average IQ could have been around 149, making them among the smartest 0.05% of people today. But if a boss-cop brainiac was so much smarter, why are they not around and we are? Well, bigger isn't always better, you know. Our brains are a lot bigger than our ape relatives, mainly in the prefrontal cortex. This part helps with high-level tasks like making decisions, remembering things short-term, and being aware of ourselves. The parts of the brain that handle our senses and movements haven't really grown much. So, maybe the boss cop spent too much time dwelling on the past rather than doing practical things like hunting. But this is all just guessing. We really don't know what happened to these clever cousins of ours. Some people even argue that boss cops weren't any different from us, with the only evidence being parts of skulls. The jungle is huge. Did you know the Amazon rainforest is home to about 30% of all the world's plant and animal species? That's impressive. However, the history of one native species, humans, has long puzzled scientists. The mysterious Kasarabe people lived here for hundreds of years and then vanished around 1400 AD. People thought the Amazon only had a few scattered tribes, but recently we discovered big, unusual shapes in the ground called geoglyphs. These might look like simple shallow ditches, but they're actually the remains of a vast civilization that spread over 5,000 square miles and includes about 450 markings, some as wide as 1,300 feet. That's insane! They likely contained ceremonial buildings and could have hosted up to 1 million people as recently as 550 years ago. Thanks to new technology like LiDAR, which uses a safe laser to map the forest without harming it, we can explore deeper. In 2019, some scans showed miles of raised roads and pathways and even pyramids over 70 feet tall. They found 26 separate settlements, 2 of which were at least 250 acres each. Damn, that's like 330 soccer fields. It's not certain what happened to the Kasarabe people. Maybe European conquistadors drove them out. Maybe the most baffling ancient civilization is one we've never actually found a trace of. Yep, I'm talking about Atlantis, the grand city that supposedly sank into the ocean. The first mentions of Atlantis come from the ancient Greek philosopher Plato, who talked about a great city near the Strait of Gibraltar. But for ages, everyone just thought Plato made up Atlantis as a perfect version of his own Athens. So why, about 12,000 years after it supposedly vanished, do we still wonder if it might be real? Well, in the 19th century, U.S. Congressman Ignatius Donnelly wrote a book giving 13 reasons why he thought Atlantis was more than just a myth. Then, in 1965, some folks thought they actually found Atlantis when they discovered the Richat structure, a massive 25-mile-wide dome in Mauritania, Africa. It's so big that you can see the whole thing from space. 2 astronauts flying over the Sahara Desert spotted this giant eye staring back at them and thought they'd made the discovery of a lifetime. Unfortunately, there's no solid evidence linking this structure to Atlantis. It's believed to have formed from volcanic activity about 100 million years ago. But it does look suspicious, doesn't it? Still, we're no closer to knowing the truth. Imagine going back to about 3,300 BCE and finding yourself in South Asia. Welcome to the Harappan civilization. These people were way ahead of their time. They had cities like Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, complete with baked brick houses, sophisticated drainage systems, and even public baths. This place might have had over 5 million people, making it one of the densest regions at the time. They also invented a system of standardized weights that was incredibly useful for traders. And trading they did. These people had connections stretching all the way to the Middle East, thanks to their great skills in metallurgy. They even had a form of ancient branding. The seals were used to stamp clay on trade goods. Despite being so advanced with a thriving urban life, there's a whole bunch of mystery shrouding their language and script. We've got bits and pieces of their writing, but no one's deciphered them yet, even with all the technology we have today. We also still don't know how exactly their society worked. It looks like they didn't flaunt their social status as much as other civilizations. No grand palaces or massive monuments. Instead, their largest buildings might have been granaries. They sure were practical. Unfortunately, all good things must come to an end. Around 1800 BCE, this bustling civilization started to decline, possibly due to shifts in river patterns. As the environment changed, the Harappans packed up, moving towards more hospitable lands. Ever heard of the Minotaur? The beast with a bull's head and a man's body, hunting the bravest travelers in a massive maze. Well, this wasn't just any old tale. It was one of the most popular dramas of the ancient world, and it was inspired by this place, the island of Crete. The Minoans lived here during the Bronze Age. They had stunning palaces, amazing frescoes, and a culture so rich it still fascinates historians to this day. They built places like Knossos, which was so complex with its multi-story buildings and elaborate hallways that it might have inspired the whole labyrinth myth. Their engineering was so ahead of its time that even their drainage systems were more advanced than what many of us have today. Let me know in the comments which of these stories you find the most fascinating, and thanks for watching.
There you are, trekking across a desert on foot. It's hot, you're terribly thirsty, and now you gotta walk around this stupid wall. Wait, a wall in the middle of a sandy, lifeless nowhere? Exactly, a wall in the northern Saudi desert. Archaeologists have just made a super exciting discovery, and what they found was not just a single wall. No, it was a whole ancient walled city that might date back to 2400 BCE. They think this place was home to around 500 people and could have been used for 1,000 years. This discovery is groundbreaking. It means that the area could have been way more advanced than anyone expected. The city was well organized, with different zones for living, towers and strong walls for protection, and different sections for all kinds of daily life. This ancient city, now called Al-Natab, was basically an oasis town, and it's great since it can give us a peek into what life might have been like in this desert thousands of years ago. Apparently, they had clearly separated areas, like residential sections, a cemetery, farmland, and even a town center. This oasis city, found in the Khaybar area, is the first big organized settlement from the 2nd or 3rd millennium BCE that researchers have uncovered in northwestern Arabia. The first surveys show that this town, which covered about 6 acres, had several districts, including the residential area, the cemetery, and the legal one, with courts. The houses were set up in neat rows, all connected by small roads. Those streets kept the residential area separate from the rest of the town. Back then, most people in this region were nomadic herders, always moving around. But archaeologists have been sure that during the Bronze Age, Northwest Arabia had small walled towns and oasis centers scattered across it. These connected oasis towns were unique, offering secure places for people to live, store goods, and trade. They started showing the beginnings of urban planning, which hints that people of that time were already starting to settle down and organize communities more seriously. The research team estimated that there were about 50 homes in Al-Natab, but that number could go up to 70 as they keep digging. They think that a few hundred people lived there, and probably one of the coolest things is that some houses went up to 3 stories tall. Built on a slope near a couple of major trade routes, this city was set up in a prime spot. Now, one of the most impressive things about this place is its water supply. The oasis had springs and aquifers, which are underground water sources, and such conditions were perfect for farming. Those water sources meant residents could grow their own food, making the town self-sufficient. The outer walls probably helped control who could enter the town and get access to its resources. This settled way of life was an impressive shift from nomadic living to a more agro-pastoral lifestyle, which means a mix of farming and herding animals. Another find that supports this theory is a bunch of tools, like grinding stones, mortars, and pestles, discovered inside the town. People there must have ground grains and prepared food. They had a diet of cereals, meat, and milk from animals they raised themselves. These astonishing findings show that the inhabitants of the town could easily feed themselves and were surprisingly advanced for that time. Thanks to better access to Saudi Arabia in the past couple of decades, archaeologists now have a much clearer picture of what life there was like thousands of years ago. The most exciting thing is that Al-Nata might have been part of a whole network of similar fortified oasis towns spread across the region, and all of these connected sites could show us how trade routes and small settlements worked together at that time in that arid area. Now, at the same time, this recent discovery isn't the only one that has the scientific world buzzing with excitement. How about we visit Egypt and see for ourselves? After all, archaeologists have just found a stash of ancient Egyptian and Greek treasure underwater. They were exploring the lost city of Thonis Heraklion off the coast of Egypt, which sank more than 1,000 years ago. This city was legendary, and nobody even knew where it was until it was rediscovered in 2000. Now they're uncovering more and more, and on this dive, they found a pile of gold and silver treasures. Those were probably used in rituals to bless Egyptian pharaohs when they took the throne. The researchers even found an ancient Greek temple dedicated to Aphrodite and some super-old Greek weapons. Frank Gaudio, the lead archaeologist, said it was astonishing that those delicate objects had survived the disaster that brought the city down. Back in its prime, Thonis Heraklion was one of the biggest port cities in the Mediterranean. It was a huge center of social life and was the main entry point for ships from Greece coming into Egypt. But tragically, due to rising waters, earthquakes, and a catastrophic tidal wave, the soil underneath the city literally turned into mush, and then the entire city sank into the Mediterranean. It was forgotten until Gaudio's team found it in 2000. Since then, they've been uncovering new parts of the city and piecing together its history little by little. If a lost underwater city doesn't seem impressive enough, we can travel to the Amazon. The discovery made there is truly mind-boggling. For centuries, people have talked about lost cities deep in the Amazon, like El Dorado, that mythical city of gold that lured Spanish explorers into the jungle. A lot of them never came back. Then, in the 1900s, a British explorer named Percy Fawcett went searching for what he called the lost city of Z, and he too disappeared. But now, finally, scientists have actually found proof that those lost cities in the Amazon were real all along. A team of scientists use a tech called LiDAR, which basically allows you to see through thick jungle from above by bouncing light beams off the ground. They flew over the jungle in Bolivia in a helicopter about 650 feet up and mapped out those hidden ancient cities. What they found were ruins of a huge urban settlement built by the Kasarabi people who lived there from 500 to 1400 CE. And it wasn't just a couple of buildings here and there. No, the LiDAR maps revealed massive urban centers, pyramids, platforms, roads, canals, and causeways, all carefully laid out. Turns out the Amazon wasn't just an untouched jungle. It was once home to big, complex cities. A scientist from the German Archaeological Institute explained that Europeans had long ignored the possibility of ancient Amazonian cities, but the LiDAR maps show they were wrong. The new maps have revealed 26 sites, including 11 that no one even knew existed. Researchers have discovered two main city sites, Landivar and Kotoka. They had massive moat causeways stretching out like spokes on a wheel, linking the main cities with smaller surrounding settlements. Some of the canals even connected the cities to rivers and a big lake, which allowed water to flow through the area. Over the years, scientists found scattered ruins all over this region, but the thick jungle made it nearly impossible to connect the dots and see if or how they were related. With LiDAR, the whole layout came to life, showing that those sites were part of a much larger organized urban system. It's now also clear that the sites had a greater meaning, since everything is lined up in a way that could be symbolic of the spiritual beliefs of the inhabitants. The Kasarabi culture isn't as famous as the Maya, but they had a thriving society in an area that faced huge challenges, like yearly flooding. And although the nearby Andes had their own monumental sites, the Kasarabi were doing something absolutely unique. They even had reservoirs to store water, which suggests they might have been dealing with occasional droughts, which is pretty unusual for the Amazon. Actually, those terrible droughts could be why the Kasarabi eventually left their cities around 1400 CE. Humans invest a lot of time and money exploring the unknown. First outer space, then the ocean floor. But there's another frontier we're trying to conquer. Scientists call it the deep frontier. I'm talking about how far down to the Earth's core we've made it so far. During the 60s, humans tried digging the deepest man-made hole on Earth. This took us deep into the Arctic Circle. What later became known as the super deep borehole is also the deepest artificial point on Earth, reaching the depth of 40,230 feet. It took 20 years to drill this far into the Earth's crust, and researchers say this is only about 1/3 of the way through to the mantle. Here's a quick anatomy of our planet. If the Earth is like an onion, the crust is like the thick skin of this onion. This part is only 25 miles thick. Beyond this is the 1,800-mile deep mantle, and after that, right at the center of the Earth, is the core, which is made up of 2 layers, inner and outer. Now, can you guess where on the planet the crust is at its thinnest? On the ocean floor. When American scientists understood that, they started drilling holes on the seabed. This gave way to Project Mohole. It began in 1961, but their technology to drill deep holes on the ocean was really bad. They had to improvise. They installed a system of propellers along the sides of their drill ship to keep it steady over the hole. The main challenge was to drill as vertically as possible. Otherwise, that deep hole would look more like a deep maze. Both the Kola Super Deep Borehole project and the Project Mohole came to an official stop in the years that followed. But hey, humans have built some pretty deep stuff underground. In 1963, a Turkish man took a swing with his sledgehammer to improve his basement and discovered a tunnel. That tunnel entrance led to more openings that connected a multitude of halls and chambers. He didn't know it, but he had discovered Deringoyu. This once lost city was up to 18 stories tall and 200 feet deep. The city was large enough to host 20,000 people, and it was simply standing beneath Cappadocia in Turkey the whole time. Cappadocia hosts hundreds of subterranean dwellings. 40 of these underground cities are at least 2 stories high, but none of them are as huge as Deringoyu. There's not a lot of historical accounts of how Deringoyu was born. Some speculate that the oldest part of the complex was dug about 2000 BCE by the Hittites. The Hittites were an Indo-European civilization who formed one of the first major civilizations of the Bronze Age in West Asia. Scholars think they built this underground city to protect themselves from invasion. Others think it was actually the Christians who built the city in the 1st century CE. They speculate that it could have been constructed to protect people from the intense temperature variations, extreme heat in summer and freezing cold in winter. Geographically, the terrain under Cappadocia is great for building. The rocks are soft, which makes tunneling easier. For that same reason, opening large caves underground is fragile. That's why most chambers have pillars that support them. On the bright side, and we are, none of the floors at Deringoyu have ever collapsed. The builders of Deringoyu thought of everything. The city was shut off from the world by huge rocks that hid its entrance. It was ventilated by a total of more than 15,000 shafts, around 10 centimeters wide. This way, they guaranteed enough breathing air in the upper levels in a way that they ended up being used as the living and sleeping quarters. The lower levels of this impressive maze were mainly used for storage. But honestly, they had it all. A room for a wine press, for domestic animals, small religious buildings. They certainly didn't spare any efforts to make that underground city as complete as an above-ground one. Now, speaking of impressive underground stuff, Switzerland has the longest tunnel in the world, built here on the Swiss Alps. This absurdly huge tunnel was built over 8,000 feet below the surface. Check this out. This is what the Gotthard Base Tunnel looks like. The first idea to build the tunnel was put forward as early as 1947, but construction only officially began in 1999. It took them years to approve the project and then scout for the perfect location. Even so, the 73 different rock types that compose Massif turned the construction into a real challenge. Some of the rocks were as hard as granite, and others were as soft as sandstone. This meant they needed different approaches and equipment so the whole thing wouldn't crumble down. Overall, they had to excavate about 28 million metric tons of rock to make way for the tunnel. There were many other challenges to build that far into the earth. The deeper into the mountain they got, the hotter the temperatures were. Since there's no natural ventilation, temperatures would get as high as 115 degrees Fahrenheit, making it really hard for workers to endure. The tunnel stretches for 35 miles from one end to the other. During the construction, workers had to use 4 massive tunnel boring machines, aka moles, to penetrate through the massif. Each of these moles was around 1,400 feet long. But that was one of the best things they could do, since these machines limit the disturbance to the surrounding ground and help to produce a smooth tunnel wall. You'd never guess that the world's deepest basement belongs to the Sydney Opera House in Australia. The building goes as deep underground as it grows above ground. But this basement isn't just the Opera House's foundation, it's a parking lot. This unique parking garage penetrates 120 feet underground, or 12 stories deep, while most car parks are only 4 or 5 stories deep. But that's not all that makes it unique. You see, if they decided to build a normal rectangular parking space, this would end up eliminating a bunch of possible parking spaces. And since they wanted to maximize the space they had available, they had to come up with some superb structure. First, they opened up a man-made cavern to make that dream possible. Then they had to come up with a design. That's what led to the donut-shaped cavern, or what engineers call a double helix. This design shocked the engineering community for its innovative approach. But hey, it worked. Today, there is space for over 1,000 cars down there, which seems about right for an opera house. Let's wow once again real quick. Some underground structures may take up to an hour to reach. Take this gold mine in South Africa that lies around 2.5 miles below the surface. Yeah, you may think, hey, it's just a couple of miles, why does it take an hour to get there? But the conditions are hard and it's not for the weak. But Milan Ladina, an Ecuadorian runner, even completed a half marathon there, despite temperatures reaching 104 degrees Fahrenheit, high humidity at 80%, and an atmospheric pressure of 1.4, comparable to what divers experience 5 meters under the sea. Yikes!